Picture two people getting into their cars after work. One climbs into a leased BMW with payments that eat up a third of his paycheck. The other gets into a 10-year-old Toyota with 200,000 miles on it. And if you had to guess which one has more money sitting in the bank, you'd probably guess wrong. Because here's the strange part. The guy in the Toyota is very likely the millionaire, and the guy in the BMW is very likely not.
That's not a hypothetical. It's one of the most consistent findings in personal finance research, and it points to something a little uncomfortable about how our brains handle money. We don't actually want to be rich nearly as much as we want to look rich. And those turn out to be two almost opposite strategies. One is quiet, slow, and invisible for years at a time. The other is loud, immediate, and designed to be seen by exactly one audience: everyone else. Think about the last time you upgraded something you didn't need. A phone that still worked fine, a car that still ran, a bigger apartment when the old one was perfectly livable. Chances are it wasn't really about function. It was about what that object said to the people around you. And here's where it gets interesting. You probably weren't even fully aware that's what you were doing. Your brain wasn't thinking, I want to impress my neighbor. It was thinking, I deserve this, or this feels like success, which is exactly how the trick works. Because conspicuous spending doesn't announce itself as spending for status. It disguises itself as a reward or a treat or just normal life. And that disguise is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Because if it were honest about what it actually was, a lot of us would probably say no.
So why would evolution or culture or whatever combination of the two wire us to prioritize looking wealthy over building wealth when building wealth is obviously the better long-term move?
The answer starts with an economist named Thorstein Veblen, who back in 1899 coined the term conspicuous consumption to describe spending whose entire point is to be seen, not used. Veblen's insight was that in a world where you can't directly observe someone's bank balance, you rely on visible signals instead. The watch, the car, the vacation photos. And because wealth itself is invisible, these signals become a kind of substitute currency. They're how status gets communicated in a world where nobody's showing you their actual net worth.
But here's the twist that makes this so much stranger than simple vanity. Economists later formalized this into what's called costly signaling theory. And the core idea is almost paradoxical. A signal is only convincing if it's expensive enough that a poor person couldn't fake it, which means the entire value of a status symbol depends on how much it hurts to buy. A luxury bag isn't attractive despite costing 4 months of someone's savings. It's attractive partly because of it. The pain is the point, because it's the pain that makes the signal credible to everyone watching. And this is actually the same underlying logic that shows up in the animal kingdom. Biologists point to things like a peacock's tail as a costly signal, an ornament so metabolically expensive and physically cumbersome that only a genuinely strong, healthy bird could afford to carry it around and still survive. The tail isn't useful. That's the whole point. Its uselessness is what makes it trustworthy.
Now stack a second bias on top of that one, something behavioral economists call the visibility bias. We systematically overweight the financial decisions we can see and underweight the ones we can't. When you watch your coworker pull into the parking lot in a new car, you register that instantly. But you have no idea what her retirement account looks like, whether she's carrying debt, whether that car payment is quietly wrecking her monthly budget. All you see is the car. And your brain, without asking permission, uses that one visible data point to build an entire story about how well she's doing. This is the same reasoning error, by the way, that makes people assume their neighbors are more successful than they are, when in reality, everyone's just watching everyone else's highlight reel and mistaking it for the full picture.
And here's the part that turns this from an individual quirk into something closer to a trap. Because status signaling isn't a one-time purchase. It's a race with no finish line. Researchers who study this call it a positional treadmill. The value of a status symbol isn't fixed. It's relative to what everyone around you has, which means the moment your neighbor gets the upgraded version of whatever you just bought, your version quietly loses its signaling power. It doesn't get worse, it just stops being special. So the spending has to continue, not because you need more, but because the comparison point keeps moving. this is part of why lifestyle creep feels so natural and so invisible while it's happening. You're not making one bad decision. You're running to stay in the same relative place on a track that never stops moving under your feet.
So we've got a signal that only works if it costs real money, an audience that can only judge you by what it can see, and a comparison treadmill that never lets the finish line stay still. Put those three things together, and you get a system that quietly punishes actual saving, because saving is invisible. Nobody applauds you for the money you didn't spend. There's no photo to post of a retirement account that grew by 4% this year. No one asks to see it. No one compliments you on it at a dinner party. So the psychological reward for saving is almost non-existent, while the psychological reward for spending is immediate, social, and visible. And when you put an invisible reward up against a visible one, the visible one wins more often than any of us would like to admit.
Which brings us to one of the most famous cautionary tales in modern financial history. And it's not a story about someone who never had money. It's a story about someone who had an enormous amount of it and lost almost all of it doing exactly what we've been talking about.
In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the rapper MC Hammer was, by some estimates, earning around $30 million a year. At the absolute peak of his fame, he did what a lot of people fantasize about doing if they suddenly got rich. He built the mansion, a 40,000 square foot custom estate in Fremont, California. And he didn't stop at buying it. He spent something like $30 million on top of the purchase price, turning it into a monument to a rival. Italian marble floors, multiple swimming pools, a bowling alley, gold-plated fixtures, tennis courts, a full recording studio. And here's the detail that really tells you everything. He kept a personal entourage of around 200 people on payroll, costing roughly $500,000 a month just to maintain the appearance of an empire. 200 people, all being paid essentially to be visible proof that Hammer had made it.
But here's where the story turns. Because none of that spending was actually building anything. It was all signal, all surface. The mansion didn't appreciate the way a normal home would because it was so specifically customized to one man's taste that almost nobody else wanted it. So when the music income slowed down, as it eventually does for basically every artist, there was no foundation underneath any of it, just a very expensive set of props. And in 1996, Hammer filed for bankruptcy, with debts reportedly in the range of $13 million. He ended up selling that dream mansion for a fraction of what he'd poured into it and moved his family into a rental.
Now, here's the part that should really sit with you. Hammer wasn't reckless with money because he didn't understand it, and he wasn't uniquely foolish. He was responding in an extreme and highly visible way to the exact same signaling pressure that shapes ordinary people's ordinary decisions. The difference is scale, not kind. When you finance a car you can't quite afford or upgrade your apartment right after a raise instead of banking the difference, you're running the same program he was running, just with smaller numbers and no camera crew watching. And that's honestly the uncomfortable takeaway here. It's not that famous people are uniquely bad with money. It's that fame and sudden wealth just remove the natural ceiling that limits how far the rest of us can take this instinct before it catches up with us.
So here's the reframe. And it's not spend less or budget better. You've heard that 1,000 times, and it's never been the actual problem. The real shift is realizing that wealth and the appearance of wealth aren't just different. They're often in direct competition with each other. Every dollar spent broadcasting your status is a dollar that can't quietly compound in the background, building the thing you're pretending to already have. And the people who end up with real financial security are very often the people who've made peace with looking, to an outside observer, kind of unremarkable. The actual millionaire next door isn't hiding a secret. He's just optimizing for a number nobody else can see instead of a signal everybody can. And once you notice that trade-off, you start noticing it everywhere, in your own impulse to upgrade something that already works, in the slight sting of pride you feel showing off something new. That sting isn't random. It's the exact mechanism Veblen described over a century ago, still running quietly in the background of a Tuesday afternoon purchase decision. And maybe the most useful mental trick here is a simple one. Before a purchase that's meant to be seen, ask yourself honestly whether you'd still want it if nobody else would ever know you had it. If the answer changes depending on who's watching, That's usually your answer right there.
So here's a question worth hitting with. Next time you're about to buy something and you notice that small flicker of people are going to see this, stop for 1 second and ask yourself who exactly you're signaling to and whether that person is even paying as much attention as you think they are. Because there's a decent chance the answer is nobody. And the only one really keeping score is you.